The empty chair accused him every morning. Matthew Sawyer set 3 plates at the pine table, knowing only 2 would be used. 8-year-old Emma traced her mother's face in the flour dust, her small fingers remembering curves that photographs couldn't capture. "Papa, why does her chair stay?" The question hung between them like Wyoming mountain fog. Outside, wind rattled their cabin's windows, carrying the scent of sage and unspoken grief. At Sarah's grave, Emma placed wild columbines against cold stone. "Mama liked purple best," she whispered to the earth that had swallowed everything soft in their world. That evening, Matthew watched his daughter light the coal oil lamp in the window, their ritual since the burial. The flame flickered, casting shadows of what was and what might never be again. "Someone might need to find their way home," Emma said, repeating her mother's words. Matthew knew she meant him. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The stagecoach wheezed to a stop at the depot, dust settling like grief over everything it touched. Matthew had come for supplies, not to witness another Eastern woman's arrival. They never lasted 2 winters at most before the isolation sent them back to civilization. "Papa, look!" Emma tugged his sleeve. A woman in practical wool struggled with a Saratoga trunk twice her width. No fancy silk, no bustled skirts that would catch Wyoming wind. Her brown hair was pinned simply, efficiently. She looked like someone who understood work. Matthew sighed. His daughter's eyes already sparkled with dangerous hope. "Need help, ma'am?" Clara Morrison looked up, hazel eyes steady despite the sweat beading her forehead. "I'd be grateful, though I warn you it's mostly books." The trunk's leather split as they lifted, spilling McGuffey readers and worn fairy tales across the platform. Pressed flowers tumbled from between pages, larkspur, roses, forget-me-nots, each one perfectly preserved. Emma knelt, gathering them like treasures while whispering their names. "You know flowers." Clara's voice softened. "Mama taught me." Emma held up a pressed violet. "Before she went to heaven." Matthew stiffened, but Clara simply nodded. "My husband loved violets too. Planted them outside our Boston window before the pneumonia took him. 3 years now." The wedding ring on her finger caught afternoon light. A widow, not a wife. Matthew felt something shift in his chest, dangerous as spring ice breaking. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the mercantile, her gossip sense activated. Another schoolteacher, the last one, barely survived Christmas. "Then I'll have to do better." Clara's smile held steel beneath its warmth. She retrieved a Harper's Weekly from the scattered items, its pages marked with careful notes. "I've come prepared." Emma studied Clara with the intensity of a child discovering possibility. "Can you braid hair? Mama could do crown braids and French twists and—" "Emma." Matthew's warning came too sharp, but Clara was already kneeling, examining Emma's tangled locks with gentle fingers. "Crown braids were my sister's favorite. Perhaps you'll let me practice. I'm terribly out of habit." Watching his daughter lean into a stranger's touch, Matthew understood the danger. Emma was building hope from pressed flowers and soft words. He'd have to guard them both against another leaving, another grave to tend. "The schoolhouse is walking distance," he said, hefting the trunk. "Best get you settled before dark." Clara Morrison followed, her shadow already threading into theirs. Monday arrived with Emma's elaborate conspiracies. "My stomach hurts," she moaned at breakfast, then miraculously recovered when Matthew suggested staying home from school. "But Miss Morrison needs us there. Papa, all the parents attend first day." Matthew recognized manipulation but couldn't deny the plea in her eyes. Sarah would have insisted they go. Sarah would have baked something to welcome the new teacher. Sarah would have, "Fine, 1 hour." The schoolhouse smelled of chalk dust and possibility. Clara had transformed the space over the weekend maps on walls, books arranged by height, wildflowers in a mason jar on her desk. She wore the same practical wool, but had added Sarah's favorite color at her throat, a purple ribbon that made Matthew's chest tighten. The Carter boys slouched in back, already planning mischief, Their father ran cattle outside town, leaving the boys mostly feral. At 15 and 16, they towered over Clara's small frame. "Gentlemen," Clara addressed them directly, "I understand you've had 3 teachers in 2 years. The older one, Randy, smirked. "They don't last, ma'am. Wyoming's too rough for Eastern ladies." Clara's smile never wavered. "How fortunate I'm not a lady, then. I'm a teacher." She moved to the board, writing equations with steady hands. "Mr. Carter, would you solve this problem?" "Don't know arithmetic." "Then you'll learn." She placed the chalk in his reluctant hand. "The beauty of mathematics is that it doesn't care about your opinion of it. The answer exists whether you find it or not." Matthew watched her guide Randy through the problem without condescension, without raised voice, with the same patience she'd shown Emma's hair. When the boy solved it correctly, his surprise was genuine. "My husband was a mathematician," Clara said quietly. "He believed anyone could learn if taught with respect." At noon, Emma discovered her lunch pail mysteriously empty. "Oh no, Papa, you'll have to bring something from home." Matthew found her sandwich hidden behind the stove an hour later, along with a note in Emma's careful printing, for Papa and Miss Morrison to share. He returned to find Clara mediating a dispute between the Carter boys and Emma's friend Lucy. The broken window shutter banged in the wind, punctuating their argument. "It ain't proper. Girls learning same as boys," Randy insisted. Clara's response was calm. "Mr. Carter, can you tell me who manages household accounts when men are driving cattle to market? Women, I suppose. And who teaches children their letters before they reach school? Their mothers. Then perhaps women understanding arithmetic and reading serves everyone's interests." She turned to Matthew. "Mr. Sawyer, I apologize for the disruption." But Matthew was already examining the shutter, finding his hands grateful for work. "Hinge is rusted through. I'll fix it." He tried not to notice how Clara moved economical, purposeful, like Sarah but entirely different. Tried not to see how she placed her hand over Emma's to guide the pencil, the exact gesture that had once made his heart stop when Sarah did it. Tried not to hear the laugh that escaped when little Tommy Henderson accidentally dipped his braid in the inkwell. That laugh, low and genuine, nothing like Sarah's bell-bright giggle. Something earthier, harder won. "Your wife was a teacher," Clara said after dismissal. "Not a question." Emma, sweeping the floor with exaggerated helpfulness, piped up. "Mama taught until I came. Then she couldn't anymore because—" The child stopped, remembering the baby brother who never drew breath. "Teaching is demanding work," Clara said simply, saving them from explanation. "I taught in Boston for 5 years. My husband encouraged it, even after we married. Said mine shouldn't be wasted." Her fingers found the mourning locket at her throat. "Pneumonia took him in 3 days. The doctor said his lungs were weak from childhood scarlet fever. Papa nursed Mama for 5 days," Emma offered, her voice small. "He held her hand the whole time." Matthew's hand stilled on the shutter. They didn't speak of those days. "Love makes us brave," Clara said softly. The apple pie appeared without ceremony. Clara produced it from her lunch basket like a magician's trick, along with muslin dishcloths and tin plates. "I stress-baked yesterday," she admitted. "It helps with nerves." "We couldn't," Matthew began, but Emma was already fetching water for washing. They ate on the schoolhouse porch as afternoon stretched toward evening. Clara used an apple core to prepare fresh fruit for tomorrow's pie. Her hands never idle. She spoke of Boston winters, of teaching immigrant children their letters, of her husband's gentle humor. Matthew found himself telling her about Sarah's fear of thunderstorms, Emma's first words, "more pie," the drought that nearly ended them last year. The words came easier than expected, like removing splinters that had festered too long. When Emma fell asleep between them on the bench, her head on Clara's shoulder and feet in Matthew's lap, neither moved. The sun painted the mountains purple gold, and Matthew noticed Clara had closed her eyes too, not sleeping but resting in the moment's peace. She braided my hair at lunch, Emma murmured drowsily. Crown style, like Mama. Matthew studied the intricate weave circling his daughter's head. Different from Sarah's technique, tighter, more practical, designed to last through wind and play. Thank you, he said. Clara opened her eyes. For the braid, for seeing her, not as the poor motherless child, but as Emma. She's remarkable, stubborn and scheming and tender-hearted. That laugh again, low and knowing. Rather like her father, I suspect. Matthew felt heat rise in his neck. When had he last blushed? When had anyone seen him as more than the grieving widower? We should go, he said, not moving. Yes, Clara agreed. Also still, Emma snored softly between them as shadows grew long, and Matthew allowed himself this moment, not comparing, not remembering, just being three people on a porch, sharing the weight of a sleeping child and the possibility of an apple pie tomorrow. October arrived with golden aspens and conspiracy. Papa, you have to practice. Emma stood in the barn, arms crossed, foot tapping exactly like her mother used to when Matthew was being stubborn. I don't dance anymore, but the harvest celebration is Saturday. Everyone dances, even Mr. Peterson, and he has a wooden leg. Matthew continued mending the harness, avoiding his daughter's eyes. He hadn't danced since Sarah's last harvest moon, when she'd been heavy with the baby that would take them both. 3 years of standing at the edges while fiddles played and couples swirled. Miss Morrison will need a partner, Emma continued, relentless. That awful Mr. Blackstone from the bank keeps visiting her. Yesterday he brought flowers. Matthew's hands stilled. Theodore Blackstone, widower. Wealthy. With soft hands that had never worked a day. Of course he'd noticed Clara. Not our concern, who courts Miss Morrison. Emma made a sound of pure frustration. One dance. I'll teach you. Before he could protest, she'd grabbed his calloused hands, positioning them as if holding an invisible partner. She hummed Beautiful Dreamer, off-key but earnest, guiding him through half-remembered steps. You're leading wrong, she criticized. Mama said confidence matters more than perfection. The words gutted him. Sarah had said that, laughing as she taught him to waltz in this same barn, pregnant and glowing and alive. He'd been terrified of embarrassing her at their wedding. She'd kissed his fears away. That's enough, Emma. But his daughter had inherited more than her mother's eyes. She'd gotten her stubborn streak too. Every evening that week, she dragged him to the barn. By Thursday, his feet remembered the rhythm, though his heart protested every step. Mrs. Henderson knocked on their door Friday afternoon, arms full of green silk. For Clara, she announced, though nobody had asked. Poor dear's been wearing that same brown wool since she arrived. A woman needs something pretty for dancing. Emma clapped her hands. It's perfect, Mama's color. Matthew turned away. Everything was Sarah's color lately, the silk, the morning sky, Clara's laugh. No, not Clara's laugh. That was distinctly her own, earned through different losses. He found Sarah's keepsake box that evening while Emma helped Clara prepare. Inside, pressed between tissue paper, lay her dance card from their courtship. Her neat script listed his name for every dance but one, a waltz she'd given to her father. The tiny pencil, still attached by its silk cord, smelled of her rosewater. You were my only partner, he whispered to the empty room. Saturday arrived crisp and bright. The entire town gathered at the meeting hall, transforming the space with paper lanterns and autumn leaves. The pickle barrel had been pushed aside for the punch bowl, and Sanders had already started rosining his fiddle bow. Matthew arrived late, hoping to avoid Mr. Sawyer. Theodore Blackstone intercepted him immediately. The banker wore a new celluloid collar, stays gleaming. Hoping to catch Miss Morrison before the dancing starts. Ordered lavender water from Denver especially for tonight. Before Matthew could respond, the crowd near the door shifted, and Clara entered. The green silk transformed her. Not into Sarah, never that, but into something entirely Clara. She'd pinned her hair differently, softer around her face. The dress nipped at her waist before flowing into a skirt that would bloom when she turned. She looked terrified and beautiful and brave. Emma rushed to her immediately, grabbing both hands. "You're perfect. Isn't she perfect?" "Papa." Matthew couldn't speak. Blackstone could. The banker swooped in with practiced charm, offering his arm, complimenting the dress, mentioning his Denver connections. Clara accepted graciously, but her eyes found Matthew's across the room, a question there he couldn't answer. The dancing began with a reel. Matthew stood with the other widowers and bachelors along the wall, watching Blackstone guide Clara through the steps. She moved with surprising grace, probably those Boston dance halls she'd mentioned. But something was wrong. Her smile was fixed, polite, the one she used for difficult parents. "She's miserable," Emma announced at his elbow. "Mr. Blackstone keeps talking about his bank, who talks about interest rates while dancing." During the second set, Clara excused herself. Matthew watched her slip out the back door, Blackstone following eagerly until Mrs. Henderson intercepted him with questions about agricultural loans. Matthew found himself moving before thinking, drawn like water to low ground. She stood behind the schoolhouse, shoulders shaking. The photograph in her hands caught moonlight, a younger Clara beside a thin man with kind eyes and a mathematician's serious mouth. "Daniel loved dancing," she said without turning. "Terrible at it, but enthusiastic. He'd count the steps out loud until I laughed too hard to continue." Matthew stayed quiet, knowing the weight of anniversary grief. 3 years, and I thought I was ready. The dress, the music, pretending to be happy. She traced Daniel's face with one finger. But Mr. Blackstone smells of pipe tobacco and pomade, and Daniel smelled of chalk dust and peppermint. It's the small things that ambush you. Sarah hated my work calluses, Matthew heard himself say. Said they caught on her good dresses. I spent a winter trying every salve, even ordered special cream from San Francisco. Night she died. She held my rough hands and said they were perfect. Said she could feel every day of our life together in those calluses. Clara turned, tears streaming but eyes steady. Does it ever stop the comparing? No, but it changes. Becomes less about loss, more about difference. Sarah would have worn that dress with dancing slippers. You're wearing work boots underneath. Clara laughed that earned laugh, rough with crying. They're more comfortable. That's my point. You're not trying to be her. You're being you, and that's... He stopped, dangerous words pressing against his teeth. That's what... Clara stepped closer. Photograph still clutched against green silk. Papa, Emma's voice shattered the moment. They're starting the waltz. Clara quickly wiped her cheeks. We should return. Wait. Matthew caught her arm gently. Would you... That is, would you save me one dance, the last waltz? Are you asking because Emma expects it? No, I'm asking because I want to dance with you. Not with a memory, not with an idea, but with Clara Morrison, who wears work boots to harvest dances and teaches Randy Carter arithmetic without shouting. She studied his face in moonlight. The last waltz, then. They returned separately. Blackstone claimed Clara immediately, but something had changed. She danced with him, with Tom Henderson, with even old Mr. Peterson and his wooden leg. But her eyes kept finding Matthew's, counting down the songs between them. Emma appeared during the Virginia reel, flushed with spinning. You haven't danced once, Papa. I'm waiting. For what? The right partner. His daughter's grin could have lit the entire hall. The last waltz was announced. Blackstone moved toward Clara, but Matthew was already there, hand extended. She took it without hesitation, letting him lead her onto the floor as Sanders played the opening notes of After the Ball. Clara's hand was smaller than Sarah's, fit differently in his. She didn't know his preferred frame distance, had to adjust when he stepped too wide, but she smelled of apple pie and chalk dust, and when she laughed at his missed step, it was that earned laugh he was beginning to crave. You're out of practice, she observed. Emma's been teaching me. In the barn, with invisible partners. Ah. That explains why you keep trying to lead me into a hay bale. They turned, green silk flaring, and Matthew saw their reflection in the window, not the couple he'd been, but the possibility of what they might become. Different, complicated, real. "Thank you," Clara said softly, "for finding me behind the schoolhouse." "Thank you for wearing work boots." She laughed again, head tipping back. And Matthew let himself want this not as replacement, not as settling, but as its own precious thing. The music ended too soon, but Clara's hand lingered in his, and Emma was already between them, grabbing both their hands, declaring it the best harvest dance ever. Walking home under stars sharp as promises, Matthew carried sleeping Emma while Clara carried her shoes, having finally abandoned the boots. Her stockinged feet made no sound on the dirt road. "Will you come for Sunday dinner?" he asked. "Will you dance with me again, when it's not the last dance?" Yes. That single word held 3 years of grief and 1 moment of hope. Clara smiled, not her polite teaching smile or her brave public smile, but something private and true. Then yes. They parted at her door, Matthew continuing home with Emma drooling on his shoulder. In his pocket, Sarah's dance card pressed against his ribs, not forgotten. Never that. But accompanied now by the memory of green silk and work boots and a woman who danced like herself. November descended like a wolf on the fold. Matthew had watched the storm glass barometer all morning, the crystals forming sharp needles that meant violent weather. The temperature had plummeted overnight, and the livestock huddled together, their breath forming clouds in the barn. "School should be canceled," he told Emma at breakfast. "Miss Morrison says education doesn't stop for weather. Besides, she's teaching us about constellations today. She has a real telescope from Boston." Against his better judgment, Matthew let her go, bundled in her wool coat and mittens. The schoolhouse was only a quarter mile. What could happen? By noon, the sky had turned the color of old pewter. By 2 o'clock, the first flakes fell, not the gentle drift of normal snow, but horizontal sheets of ice in fury. Matthew stood at the window, watching visibility disappear, and knew with sudden certainty that Clara would stay at school, waiting for parents to collect their children. By 3:30, the last parent had struggled through to claim their child, except Matthew. He was already fighting to saddle Belle, the mare snorting and dancing in the barn as wind screamed through the rafters. The quarter mile might as well have been 100. Belle knew the path by heart, but snow had already erased all landmarks. Matthew pulled his scarf higher, ice forming immediately on the wool where his breath escaped. The sleigh runners caught and dragged. Light flickered ahead, barely visible through the white wall. The schoolhouse. Thank God Clara had kept the lamps burning. He burst through the door in a cloud of snow and panic. "Papa!" Emma rushed to him, and he caught her up, checking for frostbite, for fear, for anything broken. "We're all right," Clara said quietly. She stood by the Franklin stove, feeding it pages from a McGuffey reader. "Though we're nearly out of fuel," Matthew took in the scene. Clara had pushed all the desks against the walls, creating a small living space near the stove. She'd made a nest of every coat and scarf left behind by hurried parents. Emma's astronomy lesson continued on the blackboard constellation maps drawn in careful chalk. "You're burning books. Better than freezing, though it does feel like sacrilege." She fed another page to the flames, each word warming us for a second before it's gone. "We're going home. Now." Clara moved to the window, wiping frost from the glass. "Can you even see the road?" He couldn't. The world had vanished into white chaos. "Belle knows the way. And if she doesn't, we could wander into the prairie, freeze before finding shelter." Clara's voice stayed steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the window frame. "I've read about plains blizzards. Whole families found in spring, frozen 10 feet from their own barns." She was right. Matthew hated that she was right. Then we waited out, together. He brought in the buffalo robe from the sleigh, Along with the emergency supplies he always carried in winter matches, hardtack, a jar of preserves Emma had insisted on packing that morning, as if she'd known. Belle he led into the schoolhouse itself. "You can't," Clara started. "Rather have a live horse in a schoolhouse than a dead one outside." He tied Belle to the support beam. "Besides, she'll help with warmth." They arranged their camp carefully. The buffalo robe spread before the stove, the coat nest as bedding, Clara's desk dragged close to block the wind that shrieked through window gaps. Matthew stuffed every crack with torn book pages and old assignments. "I should keep teaching," Clara said, though her lips were already blue with cold. "Distraction helps." She told Emma about Boston winters, about ice skating on the common, about gas lamps that never went out, and buildings so tall they caught clouds. Emma countered with questions about everything: why snow fell, where birds went in storms, if God got cold. "My husband believed God experienced everything through us," Clara said softly. "Our joy, our pain, our cold. That's why compassion matters. We're God's way of taking care of each other." Matthew found himself listening while he worked, adjusting the stove damper, checking window seals. Clara's theology was different from the prairie Christianity he knew, gentler, more questioning. Sarah would have argued with her. Sarah would have quoted scripture about suffering building character. Sarah. Would he ever stop measuring moments against her ghost? Darkness came early, or perhaps never left. The world contracted to their small circle of light. Emma had grown quiet, exhaustion and cold making her droop against Clara's shoulder. "We should eat," Clara suggested, though the hardtack and preserves seemed meager against the storm's hunger. They shared the simple meal in silence, listening to the wind test every board, every nail. The temperature kept dropping, even with the stove glowing red. Ice formed on the inside walls. "Tell us about Daniel," Emma said suddenly. Clara startled. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. Papa never talks about Mama anymore. Like if we don't say her name, it hurts less, but sometimes I forget things, like her laugh. So tell us about Daniel before you forget." Matthew wanted to protest, to protect Clara from the request, but she was already speaking, her voice weaving through the storm sounds. Daniel had terrible eyesight, thick spectacles that fogged whenever he was excited about an equation. He'd polish them obsessively while thinking, wearing holes in his handkerchiefs. He couldn't sleep without checking his calculations 3 times. Even on our wedding night. She stopped, blushing. "Go on," Matthew said softly. "He got up at 2 in the morning because he'd remembered an error in a proof. I found him at his desk, nightshirt and spectacles, muttering about infinite series. I was so angry. Then he showed me what he'd discovered, a pattern that looked like a flower when graphed. I had to fix it," he said. "It's too beautiful to leave broken." She pulled something from her pocket, Daniel's spectacles, one lens cracked. "I should have buried these with him, but I needed something to hold." Emma took the spectacles carefully, peering through them at the lamplight. "Everything looks different." "Yes," Clara agreed. "That's what love does. Changes how we see." Matthew felt his chest crack open, some frozen thing thawing. Sarah sang when she was scared. Thunder, darkness. That last week when the pain got bad. Always the same lullaby her mother taught her. He hummed a few bars, the melody rusty from disuse. Clara went absolutely still. Then, very softly, she began to sing. "Hush now, my darling. The shadows grow deep. Angels are guarding your wandering sleep." The exact words, the exact melody. Matthew stood frozen in the doorway between possibility and pain. "How?" he whispered. "Every mother knows it," Clara said simply. "Passed down like recipes and remedies. Daniel's mother sang it to him through scarlet fever. My mother through winter storms." Emma yawned enormously. "Sing the rest." So Clara did, her voice weaving through the storm while Emma grew heavy with sleep. Matthew watched from his frozen doorway, seeing not Sarah's ghost but Clara herself, different fingers smoothing Emma's hair, different voice carrying the ancient melody, different heart offering the same comfort. When Emma finally slept, Clara carefully extracted herself, laying the child in the coat nest and covering her with, "That's Sarah's quilt," Matthew said roughly. "Emma gave it to me, said her mother would want me to be warm." And the quilt was Sarah's masterpiece wedding ring pattern in blues and creams, every stitch perfect. Seeing it around Clara's shoulders should have hurt. Instead, it looked like blessing. "I'll take first watch," he said. "Keep the stove fed. Teach me. If something happens to you, I need to know." So he showed her the damper positions, how to read the smoke, when to add wood versus letting coals build. Their hands touched, adjusting the grate. Neither pulled away. "Matthew," she began. "Don't. Not tonight. Tonight we're just three people trying not to freeze." She nodded, understanding the boundary. But later, when exhaustion finally claimed her, she curled into the buffalo robe beside Emma, in sleep. Her hand found his shoulder where he sat feeding the fire, and stayed there, not grasping, not demanding, just resting. Matthew sat through the endless night, keeping watch, feeling the weight of that small hand like an anchor in the storm. Outside, Wyoming winter tried to erase them. Inside, three hearts beat through the darkness, not replacing what was lost, but creating something entirely new. When dawn finally came, weak and gray through frost-thick windows, Clara's hand still rested on his shoulder. Emma was tucked between them, Sarah's quilt covering all three. Belle nickered softly, demanding breakfast. They were alive. They were together. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. The storm had passed, leaving drifts higher than the windows. It would take hours to dig out, hours more to get home. But Matthew wasn't thinking about leaving yet. He was thinking about Clara's hand on his shoulder, about shared lullabies, about Daniel's broken spectacles and Sarah's perfect quilt, and how sometimes the most beautiful things come from what's been broken and mended. "Good morning," Clara said, not moving her hand. "Good morning," he replied, finally understanding that some storms don't destroy, they reveal what's strong enough to survive. December brought preparations and revelations. "I need a Joseph," Clara announced at Sunday dinner. 3 weeks after the blizzard, they'd fallen into this rhythm, Sundays at Matthew's table, sharing roast and conversation while Emma schemed transparently between them. "Randy Carter's too tall," Emma said, mashing turnips with fierce concentration. "And Tommy Henderson giggles too much. Joseph should be serious, sad, even. He's leading his pregnant wife through the desert, worried about her and the baby." Clara caught Matthew's eye. "Emma has strong opinions about the Christmas pageant." "Emma has strong opinions about everything," Matthew countered, but his tone was fond. These Sunday dinners had become the week's anchor, something to anticipate through long, cold days. "Papa should be Joseph," Emma declared. "He already has a beard, and he knows about taking care of someone who's having a baby." The words fell like stones into still water. Clara's hand paused halfway to her water glass. Matthew felt the familiar fist of memory squeeze his chest. "Emma, that's enough. But Papa." "I said enough." His daughter's face crumpled slightly, but she rallied. "The pageant's important. Mama always said Christmas pageant brought everyone together, reminded us about families." She was right. Sarah had loved the pageant, had played Mary herself the year they courted. Matthew remembered her glowing in blue cotton, cradling the Hendersons' infant son, looking at Matthew with such promise in her eyes. "I'll think about it," he said, which Emma correctly interpreted as victory. Later, walking Clara home under stars sharp as ice crystals, she touched his arm. "You don't have to." "I can ask Tom Henderson." Emma's right, though. I do know about that journey. Sarah was so frightened near the end. Not of dying, she was never afraid of that. But of leaving us. Of Emma growing up without... He stopped, throat closing. Without a mother's love. Clara finished softly. She has that now. Not the same, but she has it. Clara's breath clouded in the cold air. Matthew, I need to tell you something. About children. He waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. The scarlet fever when I was 12. It damaged more than just Daniel's lungs when he caught it from me years later. The doctor said, she pulled her shawl tighter, I can't have children. Ever. Daniel knew before we married. He said I was enough, that we'd fill our home with books and students instead. But most men want sons, heirs, continuation of their line. Matthew turned her to face him, seeing moonlight catch the tears she wouldn't let fall. I had a son, he said carefully. Perfect little hands. Sarah's nose. He never drew breath. The doctor said the cord was wrapped nothing anyone could have done. Sarah held him for an hour before the bleeding got too bad. She named him Thomas, after her father. We buried them together. He touched Clara's cold cheek. I don't need more children. Emma's enough. You're enough. The word hung between them. You're heavy with meaning. Neither was ready to fully acknowledge. 2 nights later, Matthew couldn't sleep. The wind had calmed, unusual for December, and restlessness drove him to walk. Light glowed from the schoolhouse windows. He found Clara at her desk, surrounded by fabric scraps and ribbon, sewing by the light of 6 beeswax candles. Couldn't sleep either? She didn't look up from her stitching. What are you making? Miracles. Apparently, I promised halos for angels, robes for shepherds, and something special for Mary. She held up blue fabric that caught candlelight like water. Mrs. Henderson donated her old evening dress. I'm trying to make it small enough for Emma without losing the elegance. Her fingers were bleeding from needle pricks. Matthew saw the costumes already completed rough shepherd robes with careful hems, angel wings made from stretched muslin and wire. Let me help, she laughed. You sew. I can cut fabric, press seams, thread needles for someone whose eyes are tired from straining in candlelight. They worked in companionable silence, the intimacy of shared labor more revealing than words. Matthew watched Clara transform scraps into Wonder Crepe paper into roses for Mary's crown, penny candy sewn into the wise men's treasure boxes. Sarah would have used real gold thread, he said without thinking. Clara's hands stilled. Would that have made it better? No. Different. She had access to things from her mother in Chicago. You're making beauty from what's available. That's its own miracle. Clara smiled, returning to her work. Tell me about other Christmases. The happy ones. So he did. Sarah's attempt at English pudding that turned into brick. Emma's first Christmas. Gumming peppermint sticks until her face was sticky red. The year they couldn't afford presents, so they made shadow puppets on the wall, telling stories until midnight. She sounds wonderful, Clara said simply. She was, and difficult, and stubborn, and human. The words came easier now, like loosened threads. I made her into a saint after she died, easier than remembering the fights about money, or how she resented being stuck on the ranch when she dreamed of city life. Daniel wanted to explore the Amazon. Can you imagine me in the jungle with snakes and spiders? Clara shuddered theatrically. We fought about it weeks before he died. I felt so guilty. Like our last words should have been poetry instead of argument. Sarah's last words were, "The washing needs doing." They looked at each other across the candle glow and burst into inappropriate laughter, the kind that comes from shared understanding of life's refusal to be poetic when you need it most. I should go, Matthew said when they'd recovered. But first, Emma's right. I'll be Joseph, if you'll have me. I'd be honored. 3 days before Christmas, the pageant rehearsals intensified. Emma had embraced Mary with frightening dedication, cradling the swaddled flour sack they used for practice with genuine tenderness. "You're holding baby Jesus wrong," she informed Lucy, who was understudying. "You have to support his head and look at him like he's the most precious thing ever, even though you're scared and tired and far from home." Matthew and Clara exchanged glances over the children's heads. Emma was directing the entire production from her 8-year-old perspective, adjusting Shepard's positions and correcting Angel's wing angles. "Papa, you need to look more worried about Mary. Joseph didn't know if she'd survive having God's baby." "Emma," Clara intervened gently, "perhaps we should focus on the joy of the story." "But it's scary too," Emma insisted. "Having babies is dangerous. Joseph was brave to stay with Mary when he could have left." The rehearsal fell silent. Everyone knew the Sawyer story, Sarah's death, the baby who never lived. Matthew felt the weight of sympathetic stares. "You're right," he said clearly. "Joseph was brave, and Mary was braver. Sometimes families form in unexpected ways, through fear and faith together." Clara's hand found his briefly, a touch of gratitude and understanding. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and anticipation. The church filled early, families crowding wooden pews, children vibrating with excitement. Orange pomanders scented the air, competing with pine boughs and beeswax. Emma was transformed in her blue dress, Clara's patient stitching making her ethereal. The crown of paper roses caught lamplight like stars. She looked older, carrying herself with dignity beyond her years. The pageant began with prophecy and angels. Randy Carter, reformed by Clara's patience, read Isaiah without stumbling. The shepherds quaked appropriately. Then came the journey to Bethlehem. Matthew entered, leading Emma with careful tenderness. The congregation rustled, remembering another December when Matthew had walked beside Sarah's coffin, but Emma's hand in his was warm, alive, trusting. They reached the manger hay bales arranged before the altar. Emma settled carefully, arranging her robes, then looked up at Matthew with such perfect faith that his chest ached. "Joseph," she said, departing from script, "are you afraid?" Matthew knew he should stick to the planned dialogue. Instead, he heard himself answer, "Yes, but fear doesn't mean absence of love." Clara, watching from the side where she managed the younger angels, pressed her hand to her mouth. The innkeeper turned them away. The shepherds arrived with wonder. The wise men presented their treasures. Then came the final tableau, Holy Family complete, assembled around the miracle. Emma stood, still cradling the swaddled doll, and faced the congregation. This wasn't in the script either. "Mary wants everyone to know," she began, her young voice carrying clearly, "that even new families can be holy, even families made from sadness and choosing each other. God doesn't just bless the perfect families. He blesses the ones brave enough to try again." The church went absolutely still. Mrs. Henderson was crying. Tom Gardner cleared his throat repeatedly. Even Theodore Blackstone looked moved. Emma turned to Matthew. "Isn't that right, Joseph?" Matthew's voice came out rough. "Yes, Mary, that's exactly right." Clara moved then, drawn by something stronger than propriety. She crossed to them, her hand finding Matthew's shoulder. The three of them stood in tableau, not the traditional Holy Family, but something entirely their own. "Sarah would have loved this," Matthew said quietly, and for the first time, saying her name didn't hurt. It felt like benediction, like release, like permission. The congregation erupted in applause, but Matthew barely heard it. He was watching Clara's face, seeing tears stream freely, seeing Emma beam between them, seeing a future that didn't erase the past, but built alongside it. After the pageant, distributing penny candy and stereoscope cards to children, Matthew found himself beside Clara at the refreshment table. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For letting Emma change the ending, for understanding what she needed to say." Clara touched his hand where it rested on the table. "She wasn't just speaking for herself." "I know." They stood there, surrounded by neighbors in celebration, hands barely touching, while Emma demonstrated her Mary technique to younger girls. The moment held everything grief and joy. ending and beginning. Sarah's blessing and Clara's promise. Merry Christmas, Matthew. Merry Christmas, Clara. Tomorrow would bring questions and challenges, but tonight, in candlelight and wonder, 3 people had declared themselves a family in front of God and Wyoming. Even new families can be holy, especially those brave enough to try. January arrived with devastating propriety. Clara stood at the schoolhouse door, holding an envelope sealed with red wax. The Boston postmark glared like accusation. Matthew watched from across the street where he'd been repairing the mercantile's roof, saw her face change from curiosity to something he couldn't name. "Good news," he called, though his stomach already knew better. She looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten the world existed beyond that letter. "The Brambridge Academy for Young Ladies. They've offered me a position." The hammer slipped from Matthew's hand, clattering on the frozen ground below. Brambridge. Even in Wyoming, they'd heard of it, where senators' daughters learned French and piano, where teachers lived in furnished apartments with running water and gas lights, where civilization meant more than surviving winter. He swallowed. "That's wonderful." Clara's laugh held no joy. "Is it?" Before he could answer, she'd retreated inside, closing the door with careful finality. Matthew stood on the roof until his hands went numb, staring at that closed door like it held his future. 3 weeks since Christmas. 3 weeks of careful courtship Sunday dinners, afternoon walks, Clara teaching Emma to embroider while he fixed things around the schoolhouse. They'd built something fragile and precious, unnamed but understood. Now Boston wanted her back. That evening, Emma burst through their door in tears. "She's packing." The words came between sobs. "I went to show her my sampler and she's packing her trunk, the Shakespeare and the pressed flowers and everything." Matthew's chest seized. "Maybe she's just organizing." "No. Papa?" The telegram forms were on her desk. "She's leaving us just like—" Emma stopped. But the words hung there anyway, just like Mama. "Stay here." He found Clara exactly as Emma described, surrounded by books and belongings, the same Saratoga trunk that had arrived in July, now swallowing her life piece by piece. She'd changed from her teaching dress into traveling clothes. The message couldn't be clearer. "When?" His voice came out strangled. "The position starts February 1st. I'd need to leave within the week to arrive properly." She didn't look at him, focusing on wrapping her mother's China shepherdess in newsprint. "They're offering triple my salary here. A furnished apartment overlooking the common. Academic freedom to design my own curriculum." "And that's what you want, Boston?" She finally met his eyes, and the pain there knocked him breathless. "Tell me why I should stay." The words should have been easy. "I love you. Emma needs you. You're home now." Instead, his coward tongue offered logistics. "The school term isn't finished. You have a contract." Clara's face closed. "The town council would release me for this opportunity. Emma, she's attached to you. It would devastate her. Children are resilient. She'd adjust. The Christmas pageant showed how much this community needs you. Randy Carter's finally learning. The younger ones adore you." Each practical reason felt like a nail in something's coffin. Clara packed faster, her movements sharp with disappointment. "Is that all?" Matthew lists of obligations and other people's needs. "What do you want me to say?" She slammed a book closed. "The truth. For once. The truth without qualifiers or explanations or Sarah's ghost standing between us. You want truth?" His control snapped. "The truth is I'm terrified. The truth is I can't survive another leaving. The truth is every time you laugh, I feel guilty for wanting to hear it again. The truth is I watch you with Emma and think about the children you can't have and wonder if I'm selfish enough to not care. The truth is—" "Stop." Clara's voice broke. "Just stop." She turned to the window where twilight painted the mountains purple-gray. Matthew saw her shoulders shaking and realized she was crying silently, privately, the way people cry when they've had too much practice. I'll tell Emma you'll write, he said, retreating like the coward he was. But Emma wasn't at home. Her coat was gone. Her boots. The scarf Clara had knitted her for Christmas. Panic rose in Matthew's throat. Temperature was dropping. Dark was coming. Emma knew better than to Sarah's grave. She'd gone to her mother. He ran through deepening shadows, boot soles sliding on ice. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking town, beautiful in daylight, treacherous at night. He found Emma's small form huddled against Sarah's headstone, sobbing into her mittened hands. "Emma, sweetheart, go away. You ruin everything." She turned on him, face swollen with crying. "Miss Clara was happy here until you made her sad. You never say the right things. Mama would have known what to say." "Emma, no. You just stand there being scared all the time. Scared to dance, scared to laugh, scared to tell Miss Clara you love her, and now she's leaving and will be alone forever and—" "Emma Sawyer, that's enough." Clara's voice cut through the darkness. She stood at the cemetery gate, wrapped in Sarah's green shawl, the one Matthew had given her at Christmas. She must have followed when she found them both gone. Emma flew to her, clinging with desperate strength. "Please don't go. Please, I'll be better. I'll study harder. Oh, sweetheart." Clara dropped to her knees in the snow, pulling Emma close. "You're already perfect. This isn't about you." "Then why are you leaving?" Clara looked over Emma's head at Matthew. "Because sometimes adults are too frightened to say what matters." "Papa's not frightened." Emma defended through tears. "He's the bravest. He stayed with Mama when she was dying, held her hand even when there was blood, and—" "I know, sweetheart. There are different kinds of brave." They stayed there, the three of them in the cemetery with Sarah's stone as witness. The first stars emerged, sharp and distant. Clara rose, lifting Emma with her, and Matthew saw the moment she noticed the second stone smaller, newer. "Thomas Matthew Sawyer, beloved son. One date for both birth and death." "I didn't know it was here," Clara said softly. "We don't talk about it. About him." Matthew's voice caught. "Maybe that's the problem. I don't talk about anything that matters until it's too late." Clara set Emma down gently. "Em, could you give your father and me a moment? You won't leave without saying goodbye." "I promise. I will never leave without saying goodbye." Emma looked between them. 8 years old, but ancient in her understanding. She kissed Clara's cheek, then walked to her mother's grave, kneeling to whisper secrets to stone. Clara approached Matthew slowly, like approaching something wild that might bolt. "Do you know what Daniel told me when the doctor said I couldn't have children?" Matthew shook his head, unable to speak. "He said love multiplies, it doesn't divide. That we'd love whoever came into our lives, students, friends, perhaps someone else's child who needed us." She pulled something from her pocket. Matthew recognized the cameo brooch she always wore. "This was my grandmother's. She had 12 children, but she gave this to me, the one who'll never have any. Said legacy isn't just about blood. It's about what we choose to pass on." Clara. "I came to Wyoming because Boston held too many ghosts. The school where Daniel taught, our apartment, the hospital where—" She touched the brooch. "I thought distance would help. Instead, I found new ghosts. Sarah's recipes in your kitchen. Her dresses, Emma's growing into. Her grave I pass every day. I know. I'm sorry." "No, listen. At first I resented her. This perfect dead woman I could never equal. Then Emma told me stories how Sarah burned soup, fought with you about money, cried when she had to kill chickens. She became real, human, someone I might have been friends with." Matthew felt tears freezing on his cheeks. When had he started crying? Clara continued. "I could stay for Emma. She's easy to love. I could stay for the students, the community, the work. But Matthew—" She took his face between her mittened hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I need to know you want me to stay. Not as Emma's teacher, not as Sarah's replacement. Me, Clara, with my sharp tongue and burnt breakfast and inability to have children." The moment stretched like spun glass, fragile and brilliant. Matthew felt Sarah's presence not blocking but blessing. He thought of their last conversation, washing, kneading, doing, practical to the end. Sarah would want this. She'd probably be furious it had taken him so long. "The first time you laughed," he said slowly, "that earned laugh behind the schoolhouse, I thought my chest would crack open. Not because you sound like Sarah, you don't, but because I wanted to earn another laugh, and another. I want to wake up every morning knowing I might make you laugh that day." Clara's hands trembled against his face. "When you sang to Emma during the blizzard, I didn't hear Sarah's ghost. I heard you, Clara Morrison, who wears work boots to dances and teaches Randy Carter patience and makes costumes from scraps. I saw you choose us over and over, staying through the storm, changing the pageant ending, kneeling in snow for a grieving child." He covered her hands with his. "Emma needs you. Yes, this town needs you. True. But His voice broke completely. "I need you like air, like spring after winter, like hope after grief. Not to replace what I lost, but to be what you are, unexpected, necessary yourself." Clara made a sound between laugh and sob. "That's all." "Stay," he said simply. "Choose us. Choose me. Let me spend every day earning that laugh, deserving that choice. Let me love you not perfectly, not without scars, but completely." "Matthew Sawyer," Clara said, tears streaming freely. "You impossible, stubborn, wonderful fool." She kissed him then, there in the cemetery with his first love's blessing and his daughter's witness and the stars sharp as promises overhead. Her lips were cold, tasted of salt and sorrow and something sweeter possibility. Perhaps, or grace. Emma crashed into them, arms wrapping around both. "Does this mean you're staying? Please say you're staying." Clara pulled back just enough to speak. "I need to send a telegram." "Saying what?" Emma demanded. Clara looked at Matthew, that earned laugh finally breaking free. Respectfully declining, found a better offer. "We haven't actually offered," Matthew began. "Papa," Emma kicked his shin. "Ask her properly." So he did, there in the cemetery where endings and beginnings blurred together. Not the proposal he'd planned in some distant future, but perfect for who they were, complicated, wounded, choosing joy anyway. "Clara Morrison, will you marry us, Emma and me? Will you be my wife and her mother and yourself all at once?" Clara held Emma with one arm, Matthew with the other. Yes, to all of it. Yes. They walked home together through starlight and snow, Emma between them chattering about wedding plans, at Sarah's grave. The evening wind stirred, and Matthew could have sworn he heard laughter not ghostly but grateful. The sound of someone finally able to rest. The trunk could be unpacked tomorrow. Tonight. They had promises to make and a future to imagine. Clara had chosen them over Boston. Love over safety. This complicated family over prestigious solitude. And Matthew had finally chosen courage over fear, speaking truth before it was too late. The lamp glowed in their window, and for the first time in 3 years, everyone who belonged there was coming home. March came not with lions, but with mud. The spring thaw transformed Wyoming into a landscape of brown water and exposed earth. Everything that had been frozen now flowing, changing, becoming. Matthew stood at the mercantile, staring at the seed catalog display, when Tom Henderson slapped his shoulder. "Heard you ordered quite the load from Burpees. Planning to feed the whole county." Matthew said nothing, but his ears burned. The order had been Clara's doing, though she'd been mysterious about it, only saying she needed good soil and patience. "Also heard Miss Morrison's been declining teaching offers left and right," Tom continued, grinning. "Boston, Denver, even San Francisco. Seems she's developed a powerful attachment to our little schoolhouse." "People talk too much," Matthew muttered. "People notice when a woman starts ordering from catalogs addressed to Mrs. Sawyer-to-be." Matthew's head snapped up. "She didn't?" "Ask Peterson at the post office." Tom's grin widened. "Course. Mrs. Pritchard near had apoplexy. Says it's scandalous. Advertising intentions before proper announcements. Matthew knew he should care about propriety, about the proper order of things. Instead, he found himself smiling. Clara had never done anything the expected way. Why should she start now? He found her that afternoon at the schoolhouse, dismissing students for lunch. She wore her teaching dress but had tied Sarah's apron over it, the one with strawberries embroidered on the pockets. Seeing his wife's apron on Clara's form should have hurt. Instead, it looked like continuity. "I hear you've been ordering seeds, future Mrs. Sawyer." Clara didn't blush. "I hear you've been building something in the barn, hidden under tarps." Emma can't keep secrets. Neither can the Postal Service, apparently. She stepped closer, and Matthew caught the scent of chalk dust and something else, linseed oil. "I've been thinking about gardens. In March, still might freeze. Not planting yet. Planning. Your yard has good southern exposure." Sarah knew what she was doing, placing beds where she did. Clara pulled a folded paper from her pocket, sketches of garden plots, detailed and annotated. "I want to add to what she started, not replace, add. Climbing roses on the eastern fence, herbs near the kitchen, and here." She pointed to a bare patch near the porch. "Flowers for cutting, zinnias, sweet peas, cosmos." Matthew studied the carefully drawn plans, seeing past and future overlaid like transparent maps. Sarah always wanted sweet peas, never got them to grow. "Different technique needed. I learned in Boston they like cool roots, planted deep." Sarah was probably too gentle with them. That earned laugh again, recognizing Sarah's careful nature. She coddled everything, even weeds. Nothing wrong with kindness, but sometimes growth needs disruption. They were talking about more than gardens, and both knew it. Saturday brought unexpected warmth, and Matthew arrived at Clara's cottage to find her already in work clothes, men's trousers she'd hemmed short. One of his old shirts, hair tied back with twine. She looked nothing like a Boston lady. She looked like home. Emma bounced between them, carrying seed packets like treasure. "Miss Clara says we plant dreams in spring and harvest joy in fall." "Your mother said something similar," Matthew said without thinking, then waited for the familiar stab of pain. It didn't come. They worked through morning into afternoon, 3 shadows moving across the mud. Clara had studied the land with scientific precision: soil quality, drainage, light patterns. She assigned tasks like a general organizing campaigns. "Matthew, turn the compost into that back bed, it's been cooking all winter. Emma, sort these seeds by planting date. We'll start cool weather crops in the cold frame." Matthew found himself following orders gladly, muscles remembering the rhythm of shovel and hoe. Emma chattered constantly, mixing memories of Sarah's garden with excitement for Clara's additions. The past and future planted together, row by careful row. "Mama's roses are budding," Emma announced, examining the bushes Sarah had pampered for years. "They're early this year," Clara observed. "Must be the warm spell. We should prune them tomorrow, encourage better blooming." "Sarah never pruned much," Matthew said, too afraid of hurting them. Clara's hands stilled on the rain barrel she was checking. "And you, are you afraid of pruning, of cutting away dead wood so new growth can flourish?" Before he could answer, wagon wheels crunched on gravel. Mrs. Pritchard descended like divine judgment, her Sunday meeting clothes immaculate despite the muddy roads. Behind her, several other women from the congregation formed a tribunal of propriety. "Mr. Sawyer," her tone could have frozen the spring thaw. "We need to discuss the scandal you're creating." Emma stepped protectively in front of Clara. "What scandal? We're planting gardens." "Hush, child. Adults are speaking." Mrs. Pritchard's gaze scorched over Clara's mannish attire. "Miss Morrison, you were seen ordering items under a presumptuous name. You've been spending inappropriate time alone with Mr. Sawyer. You're confusing this innocent child with your brazen disregard for mourning periods and proper courtship." "It's been 3 years," Matthew said quietly. Sarah's been gone 3 years, and you think that gives you license to parade this replacement before the entire town, to let your daughter call her mother already? I don't call her mother, Emma said fiercely. I call her Miss Clara, but she's teaching me things Mama wanted me to know. That's not replacing, that's continuing. Mrs. Pritchard's face purpled. Children should be seen. My daughter may speak in her own home. Matthew's voice carried the kind of authority that comes from quiet fury. As may my intended wife. Intended! Mrs. Pritchard clutched her hymnal like a weapon. Without proper announcement, without asking the congregation's blessing, this is how corruption begins, with small compromises of virtue. Clara stepped forward, and Matthew saw something shift in her posture, the Boston lady emerging from beneath Wyoming dirt. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the kind of cultured authority that made Mrs. J. Pritchard step back. Mrs. Pritchard, I believe you've been married once to your childhood sweetheart, a proper courtship of 3 years, engagement of 1, married in your mother's dress with the whole county attending, as is proper. How fortunate for you. Clara's tone could have etched glass. I married at 23, after a 6-month courtship that scandalized my proper Boston family. My husband was Jewish, you see, a mathematician, brilliant, kind, absolutely improper by every measure society held. We had 4 glorious years before pneumonia stole him in 3 days. I held his hand while he drowned in his own lungs, knowing I'd never bear his children, never grow old beside him, never explain to proper people why our love mattered more than their approval. The gathered women shifted uncomfortably. Clara wasn't finished. Matthew held his wife through 5 days of agony, watching her bleed to death while their son lay dead in her arms. He's earned the right to whatever happiness he can grasp. Emma lost her mother before she could learn to braid hair or bake bread or become a woman. She's earned the right to whoever she chooses to love. Clara looked each woman in the eye. Tomorrow, I'll stand in your church. You can whisper about my past, my barren womb, my unwomanly education. But understand this, I choose love over propriety. I choose this family over position. I choose muddy gardens and burnt breakfasts and a man who builds me bookshelves without being asked because he notices I stack volumes on windowsills. She turned to Matthew, and her smile was brilliant, terrible, beautiful. I choose the widower who speaks his first wife's name with reverence, not pain, who tends her grave and raises her daughter and still has room in his scarred heart for unexpected grace. Finally, she looked at Emma. I choose the girl who writes secret letters to Boston, begging strangers to bless a love she engineered through sheer stubborn hope. The silence stretched taut. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Henderson spoke from the back of the group. Good heavens, Prudence, let them be. We all see how Matthew smiles now, how Emma blooms, how Clara's brought learning and laughter back to this town. If that's not God's blessing, what is? Minister Howard's voice carried from the road he'd apparently been listening. I'd like to remind everyone that Christ himself was rather fond of disrupting propriety for love's sake. Mary Magdalene, the Samaritan woman, tax collectors and sinners. Perhaps we could extend that same grace. Mrs. Pritchard deflated like punctured pride. But the proper order. The proper order, Clara said gently now, extending her earth-stained hand to the woman, is love first, then everything else. Would you like to see the garden plans? I'm adding a section for church bouquets. Fresh flowers every Sunday through September. It was masterful, the extended hand, the offered peace, the reminder of beauty to come. Mrs. Pritchard looked at Clara's outstretched fingers, at Matthew's protective stance, at Emma's fierce little face, and something in her rigid posture softened. Roses, she asked tentatively. The altar needs roses. 3 varieties, Clara confirmed, including Sarah's yellow climbers, which I'm told were her pride. And there it was, the bridge between past and future, the acknowledgement that love doesn't erase, but encompasses. Mrs. Pritchard took Clara's dirty hand in her clean one, a benediction of earth and propriety. After the women left, murmuring about spring weddings and flower arrangements, Clara walked to the corner of the garden where Sarah's roses climbed. From her pocket, she pulled a small burlap sack. Rose seeds from my mother's garden in Boston. She saved them every year. Said roses remember their origins even in new soil. She looked at Matthew. Would Sarah mind if they grew together? Matthew thought of Sarah, practical, generous Sarah, who would have admired Clara's courage, would have laughed at the catalog scandal, would have loved seeing Emma defended so fiercely. She'd have helped you plant them. Together, they prepared a new bed beside the established roses. Emma carried water from the rain barrel while Clara showed her how to space seeds, how to mark rows, how to believe in invisible futures. Matthew built small shelters from glass and wood, cold frames to protect tender hopes. As the sun set, painting the mountains gold and purple, they stood surveying their work. Mud covered everything: clothes, hands, even Emma's freckled nose. But underneath that mud, seeds waited. Sarah's roses would soon bloom beside Clara's, the past and future planted in the same garden, growing toward the same sun. "Papa," Emma said, slipping her dirty hand into his, "do you think Mama knows about the garden about us?" Matthew looked at Clara, who was sketching tomorrow's planting in her notebook. Dirt smudged across her cheek like war paint or blessing. He thought about Sarah's final gift, not just Emma, but the capacity to love again, deeper for having known loss. "I think," he said slowly, "she planted the seeds for this long ago. We're just tending what she started." Clara looked up from her sketching, that earned laugh breaking free. "Then we'd better make it magnificent. Sarah's garden, Clara's additions, Emma's dreams, all of it growing together." They walked home as evening settled, 3 muddy figures leaving footprints in spring earth. Behind them, the garden waited past and future, sorrow and joy, love and loss and love again, all planted in the same ground, reaching toward tomorrow's sun. Tomorrow. Clara would stand in church as herself, not Sarah's replacement, but Matthew's choice. Emma's defender, the town's teacher, the woman who ordered seeds under her future name without apology. But tonight, they were simply 3 people with dirt under their fingernails and hope in their hearts, planning where to plant tomorrow's roses. April chose their wedding day with Wyoming caprice sun and snow in the same hour, as if the sky couldn't decide between winter's ending and spring's promise. Clara stood in Matthew's bedroom, looking at herself in Sarah's mirror while Emma made final adjustments to the dress. Not Sarah's wedding dress that lay preserved in tissue, too sacred for wearing. This was Matthew's mother's gown, discovered in a trunk that hadn't been opened since her death 10 years prior. Cream silk yellowed to ivory, high-necked in the old style, with buttons Emma had polished until they gleamed like pearls. "You look beautiful," Emma breathed, stepping back to admire her work. Different from Mama, but beautiful. Clara touched the dress carefully. 3 women's histories in one garment: Matthew's mother, who'd worn it traveling from Pennsylvania, Sarah, who'd preserved it with lavender sachets, and now Clara, the unexpected bride who'd arrived with books instead of dreams. "Do you think she'd approve your Mama?" Emma considered this with 8-year-old solemnity. "Mama always said God works in mysterious ways. You're pretty mysterious, Miss Clara. You teach Latin and wear pants and make Papa laugh." She paused. "I think Mama would say you're exactly the mystery we needed." A knock interrupted them. "Clara," Matthew's voice carried nervousness. "There's someone you should see." She opened the door, careful of the dress. Matthew stood in his one good suit, hair still damp from washing, looking younger than his 34 years. Behind him, filling the narrow hallway, stood 3 people Clara never expected to see again. "Aunt Elizabeth." Her voice cracked like breaking ice. Elizabeth Morrison swept forward, Boston breeding evident in every movement despite the frontier setting. Behind her, Clara's cousins James and Margaret waited, dressed for wedding finery despite the journey. "Clara dear." Elizabeth's embrace was restrained but genuine. "Did you really think we'd miss your wedding? But how the distance? A very determined young lady wrote to us." Elizabeth looked at Emma with approval. Several letters, actually increasingly urgent. The last one said if we didn't come, you'd never forgive us and we'd miss seeing you happy, which would be a tragedy because you deserved happiness more than anyone after what you'd survived. Emma had the grace to look slightly abashed. I might have exaggerated about the not forgiving part. Emma Sawyer, Matthew's shock was genuine. How did you even know the address? I'm very resourceful, Emma said primly. Also, Miss Clara keeps her correspondence in the same drawer as the pepper drops. Clara found herself laughing and crying simultaneously. You impossible, wonderful child. I told them about Daniel too, Emma added quietly. How you loved him and lost him and were brave enough to love again. Aunt Elizabeth cried. I did not cry, Elizabeth protested, though her eyes suspiciously bright. I merely acknowledge that perhaps Boston's loss is Wyoming's gain. James stepped forward, formal in his morning coat. Clara, I know I'm a poor substitute for your father, but if you'd permit me, I'd be honored to escort you. Clara's father had died when she was 15, her mother 2 years later. She'd walked alone to marry Daniel, orphaned and proud, to be offered family now, here, in this unlikely place. Yes, she managed. Yes, please. The schoolhouse had been transformed. Every family had contributed something: ribbons, wildflowers, precious candles saved for special occasions. The rough benches were softened with quilts. Mason jars held arrangements of sage and early roses from Sarah's garden. The whole space smelled of beeswax and hope. The crowd was small but complete. Mrs. Me Henderson played the pump organ, only slightly out of tune. Randy Carter had cleaned his boots and slicked his hair, looking almost respectable. Even Mrs. Pritchard had come, wearing her best black bombazine and what might have been approval on her pinched face. Minister Howard stood at the front, Bible open to Corinthians. Behind him, someone had written on the blackboard in Clara's neat script, Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Matthew waited by the altar if 3 stacked crates covered with embroidered cloth could be called that. His face when he saw her wonder and grief and joy all mingled made Clara's steps falter. James steadied her with gentle pressure. Courage, he whispered. He looks at you like Daniel did, like you're the answer to questions he didn't know he was asking. They'd chosen simple vows. No elaborate promises about forever. No pretense that they were unmarked by loss. Instead, they spoke truth. Clara, Matthew said, his voice carrying over the hushed assembly. I promise to love you not instead of but alongside all I've loved before, to make room for your memories as you've made room for mine, to build with you a future that honors every path that brought us here. Clara's response came clear and strong. Matthew, I promise to tend what you've planted and add my own seeds to the garden, to Mother Emma not as replacement but as myself, to light the lamp each evening so all our beloved dead and living know their welcome home. Emma stood between them, holding both rings on a pillow she'd embroidered herself, lopsided hearts and crooked flowers, perfect in their imperfection. When Minister Howard asked who gave this woman, Emma piped up before James could speak. We all do, Boston and Wyoming, and everyone who loved her before and everyone who loves her now. The congregation laughed not mockingly but with genuine warmth. This was what community meant, claiming each other, past and present woven into future. The rings were simple gold bands. Matthew's had been his father's. Clara's was new, ordered from Denver. But Emma had insisted on an inscription, all our loves, always. You may kiss your bride. Matthew cupped Clara's face gently, as if she might disappear like morning frost. The kiss was brief, appropriate for public viewing, but Clara felt the promise in it, nights of deeper kissing to come, years of learning each other's geometries. Ladies and gentlemen, Minister Howard announced, Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Sawyer. The rice throwing was enthusiastic, if uncoordinated. Tommy Henderson managed to get most of his handful in Clara's hair. The honey cakes Mrs. Henderson had baked disappeared quickly. adults pretending they weren't racing children for the last pieces. Someone had brought a fiddle, and impromptu dancing broke out despite the cramped space. But the surprise that made Clara cry came when she saw the corner Matthew had prepared. Her books, all of them, from the Saratoga trunk, were shelved neatly beside Sarah's Bible and hymnal. Her parents' portrait hung beside the photograph of Sarah, and a new daguerreotype waited the three of them, taken that morning by the traveling photographer Emma had secretly arranged. "When did you—" "Emma's not the only one who can plan surprises." Matthew's smile was shy, pleased. "The shelves are built deep, room for all the books you'll add over the years." Clara traced the spines, her Greek primers next to Sarah's receipt book. Daniel's mathematics journals beside Wyoming farming almanacs. All their lives, all their loves, organized on the same shelves. Elizabeth approached during the reception, studying the photographs with careful attention. "She was lovely," she said simply, indicating Sarah's portrait. "She was," Clara agreed without jealousy. "And you're happy truly." This isn't just escape from grief. Clara watched Matthew dancing with Emma, both of them laughing as they tried to avoid stepping on each other's feet. The late afternoon light caught them gold and perfect, but it was their imperfection that moved her Matthew's lingering sadness. Emma's motherless years, her own barren future, all of it, broken and mended and beautiful. "It's not escape from grief," she told her aunt. "It's building alongside it. We're all haunted here, but we're choosing to be haunted together." Elizabeth squeezed her hand. "Your mother would be proud. Your father, too. And Daniel—" She paused. "Daniel would want you to have this. Every bit of it." As evening approached, the guests gradually departed. Mrs. Pritchard surprised everyone by kissing Clara's cheek and whispering, "Make him happy. He deserves it. So do you." The Boston relatives were staying at the boarding house, promising to visit again tomorrow before their long journey home. The schoolhouse emptied until only 3 remained the new family, alone for the first time as a unit. "Now?" Emma asked eagerly. "Now?" Matthew agreed. Clara looked between them, confused, until Emma grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the window. There sat the coal oil lamp, the one they lit every night, but beside it lay 3 matches. "We each light one," Emma explained, "all together, so the lamp knows we're all home." They stood before the window as twilight painted the mountains purple. Matthew struck his match first, the sulfur flare bright in the dimming room. Clara followed, her flame wavering until it steadied. Emma went last, needing 2 tries before her match caught. Together, they touched flames to wick. The lamp bloomed into light, casting 3 shadows on the wall, tall, medium, small, but overlapping into one shape. Not replacing what was, but adding to it, layers of love and loss and choosing joy anyway. "Should we say something?" Clara asked. Emma usually prays. Matthew said. Emma nodded, closing her eyes, her high voice carrying certainty beyond her years. "Dear God and Mama and baby Thomas and Daniel and everyone watching, thank you for sending Miss Clara when we needed her. Thank you for making Papa brave enough to love again. Thank you for giving Papa his smile back, the real one that reaches his eyes. Thank you for our new family that doesn't forget our old family, but makes room for everyone. Please help the garden grow and the roses climb and the lamp always have oil. Amen." "Amen," Matthew and Clara echoed. They stood in the lamplight, watching night settle over Wyoming. The house felt different, fuller, warmer, complete in a way it hadn't been since Sarah's death, not because Clara replaced what was missing, but because she added what was needed. Matthew pulled both his girls close, his daughter who'd orchestrated this ending, his wife who'd chosen them over easier paths. The lamp flickered but held steady, its light a beacon in the darkness. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sawyer," he whispered against Clara's hair. "I've been home," she replied. since the first time Emma fell asleep between us on the schoolhouse porch. Later, after Emma was tucked into bed with promises that yes, Clara would still be there in the morning and every morning after, Matthew and Clara sat on the horsehair settee, watching the lamp burn steady. "No regrets?" he asked. "Boston seems very far away tonight." "Everything I need is here," Clara said simply. "You, Emma, shelves for my books, earth for our garden, and that lamp telling everyone living and dead, past and future, that love lives here." Matthew kissed her then, properly this time, with no audience but the lamp and the stars and perhaps Sarah's blessing on the spring wind. When they finally climbed the stairs to begin their wedding night, they left the lamp burning. It would burn every night for the next 40 years, through births and deaths, droughts and abundance, sorrow and joy. Travelers would come to know the Sawyer house by its light, the place where all loves were welcome, where families could be built from broken pieces, where even the saddest stories could find happy endings. But tonight, it simply burned for 3 people who'd found each other across grief and distance, who'd chosen to plant their seeds in the same garden, who understood that love doesn't divide, it multiplies, encompassing all who came before and all who would come after. The lamp burned steady, and in its light, they were home. Sometimes I think about Clara's lamp still burning in that window. Though the house stands empty now, Emma's grandchildren having moved to Denver. But the light remains in the telling, doesn't it? In the way we carry these stories forward like seeds in our pockets, waiting for the right soil. Matthew taught me that grief doesn't end, it just makes room for something else to grow alongside it. Sarah's roses still climb that eastern fence, tangled now with Clara's Boston varieties, so you can't tell where one ends and another begins. That's what family truly is. I think not the clean lines we draw on paper, but the wild tangle of choosing each other despite the ghosts we carry. Emma wrote in her journal, discovered years later, that she never called Clara mother because she already had one. Instead, she called her mine, my Clara, my teacher, my defender, my chosen one. Perhaps that's the deepest gratitude, not for replacements, but for additions. For hearts brave enough to love what's broken and patient enough to tend what others planted. We light our lamps each evening, don't we? Hoping someone sees. Hoping all our beloved dead and living know they're welcome home.